This is my final microeconomics presentation in which I will be talking about and discussing how government regulation maintaining competition occurs within different market types. Now, like I stated earlier, the topic that I will be discussing and talking about in this presentation is how government regulation can maintain competition within certain types of markets. Now, governments have different reasons for maintaining competition, either in ways they see fit in order to maximize total surplus, in order to increase competition in markets that don't have it as much, and you can see some other reasons within the graphic displayed below. Now, what does this mean overall? Well, governments try to break up monopolies in order to increase competition and total surplus, or as they best see fit. You can see this in the graphic on the right, with the market on the left being a perfectly competitive one, having a balance between consumer and producer surplus. It may not be equal, however, it maximizes the total surplus within the market. However, the monopoly graphic on the right has more producer than consumer surplus, and that is to there only being one firm within the entire market. And they also have dead weight loss, which is area where they are not maximizing their total surplus. The government is able to accomplish this through multiple ways. One way is through antitrust policies and laws, which are designed to prevent companies from creating or maintaining oligopolies or monopolies that restrain competition. One example of the government doing this is the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. Now, there can be different public policy responses, i.e., a natural monopoly, which may have different impacts if the government regulates them. The higher fixed costs means that they should probably persist in one way or another. Another example of this is price regulations, which is the government installing price ceilings or rate of return regulations to ensure that these companies charge fair prices and don't make excessive profits. Another example is maintaining public ownership of monopolies. Government can control monopolies and run it as a public service to ensure that it is operated within the public interest. For example, USPS or the post office is a publicly owned monopoly. Another example of government regulation is patents and copyrights, which the government allows these within the markets to incentivize innovation and creation and makes the barriers to entry only temporary, allowing for competing firms in the long run to offer the same good or service in that market. And finally, to stop a corruption within markets, governments can prevent against collusion of firms, or they can just break down large monopolies through legal processes. Now, there are four main different levels of competition that all have unique traits in which makes them unique from one another. And these are pure competition, monopolistic competition, oligopoly, and pure monopoly. Pure competition and monopolistic competition do not need government regulation in order to maintain competition, while oligopoly and pure monopoly do. Now, in order to maintain competition, government regulation does not exist within these market types. This is because of multiple firms being within industries instead of a few, like an oligopoly, or one in a pure monopoly. There are also close substitutes for the products that are both standardized and differentiated depending on what market you're in. This is because consumers have the ability to choose and pick between different types of products in order to find what best fits their needs. There also is little to no barriers of entry, which allows for more firms to enter into there, allowing their products to be within the market, creating competition, which is unlike the case in an oligopoly and pure monopoly. Now, an oligopoly consists of a few firms with either a standardized or differentiated product. Does not matter because there's only a few firms within the oligopoly markets. Their price control is limited by mutual interdependence, which is oligopolies have to monitor how their competitors respond to their price tactics, not only just their consumers. There are significant barriers to entry as it is way harder to get in and out, unlike a pure competition or monopolistic competition. And there is a great deal of non price competition within an oligopoly. And some examples of oligopoly are big pharma, steel companies, automobiles, farm implements, and household appliances. As these products are either standardized or differentiated depending on what you look at, but since there's few firms within those markets, they're able to have more control over the price. A pure monopoly also has government regulation within it to maintain competition. This is due to there only being one firm within a pure monopoly that sells a unique product with no close substitutes to that product. They have considerable control over price as they are the only seller in the market for that product, and there are no barriers to entry and exit as they are blocked off, and it is pretty hard to get into a monopoly market unless an outside force acts on the monopoly or it falls away for somehow some reason. There is mostly public relations and advertising due to the non-price competition, and some examples of a pure monopoly are your local utilities or Google in this case, as they consist of the only market or basically the only market for what they do. Now, there are cases where government regulation to maintain competition needs to exist, such as in oligopolies and pure monopoly markets. So, an example of this in the Wall Street Journal article titled A Short Lesson in Drug Competition, it talks about how smaller companies and startups are starting to challenge bigger companies' market power over the pharmaceutical industry. For example, the FDA approved BridgeBio's heart disease medicine, which will challenge Pfizer, along with Analam Pharma having their technology approved next spring. It also talks about how Pfizer loses some patents in 2028, allowing these smaller firms to step into the market when they are able to. Another important point is that both the political left and right are somewhat in favor of price regulations, but argue about how they should be enacted within the big pharma market. I was able to take away from this article that patents, trademarks, and copyrights are useful, but could have positive and negative effects on a market, as smaller firms can enter, but bigger firms can develop new medicine while holding onto the current patent, recycling their patent and trademark cycles. This could also lead to price regulations, allowing for fair price medicine and prohibits excessive profits for these already big monopolized companies, leading to more firms entering the big pharma market and leading to more innovations in medicine. Another example of government regulation within an oligopoly market is found in the Wall Street Journal article titled The Capital One Discover Merger and the Payments Moat. Some important points that I found within it are that college economic professors are saying that this merger brings on more competition rather than less, while the government who's trying to regulate it, more specifically Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren, said that this merger should not go through as it will create two bigger heads instead of letting smaller firms or singular firms compete against each other. This merger is happening because Visa, MasterCard, and Amex hold 95% of all credit clearing transactions, and Capital One and Discover are trying to lower that number. I was able to take away that government regulation have multiple ways of occurring. Stopping a deal is one of them. They can also disperse the markets, or they can limit prices or distribution of cards if this deal was to go through. And a smaller network like Discover gaining financial power through Capital One and also generating $35 billion if this deal were to go through allows for increased security within this oligopoly shaped market. Now, government regulation to maintain competition also does exist in monopoly type markets. This is the case within the article titled Canada Sues Google Alleging Anti-Competitive Online Ad Practices. Within the article, it talks about how Canada sued Google, saying they acted unlawfully in building their market share in advertising online. The US government has also been on a 5-year investigation into Google with its first antitrust case beginning in October 2020. They also have been on Google for working with Apple to have Google be the default Safari on all iPhones. They also said Google has 90% of all search-based data and controls 90% of that market, along with charging a 30% charge on products and apps within its App Store. The case against Google says that Google has not allowed for any competition and has acted like a pure monopoly, shown by how Google's advertising companies are also owned by Google instead of being hired by Google, letting Google generate more profit and more money through them, along with their App Store dilemma and their Apple dilemma, along with many others. Some takeaways that I gained was that being as large a scale a company as Google, a somewhat monopoly type company in the search market, it takes multiple governments in order to regulate it, such as the Canadian government, the United States government, even some government in countries over in Europe, such as France and the United Kingdom. And monopolies within different industries have different ways of maintaining market power, such as Google owning most of the search data, being able to charge products on their app store extra charges, being able to talk to tech developers to have their search engine be the default in all their phones. Google is a monopoly as it is different ways of controlling and keeping its dominance over its search and based market. Another example of government regulation to maintain competition within a monopolistic type market is the article titled "Nvidia Probed in China Over Possible Anti-Monopoly Violation." Some important points that I found is that both the United States and Chinese government have established sanctions or violations against Nvidia, which displays how big of an industry Nvidia is within the market or within its specific market. And also, a proportion of revenue has sank from Nvidia due to U.S. restrictions on selling to their most advanced chips to Chinese customers. Which leads me to my second point, or the interesting point within the article, that the Chinese and U.S. government create competition within themselves as they regulate companies that sell in both countries. Now, this can be dictated within how they regulate oligopolies or pure monopolies, or since they have tension between each other, they even regulate monopolistic competition and pure competition type firms and industries, which creates competition between those two governments. And that leads me into my takeaways as well. As they regulate how NVIDIA operates, Chinese government creates competition between countries through regulations, as governments create competition within themselves as they allow or regulate markets where they seem fit, and they leave these multinational companies scrambling to act at times, and it shakes up the markets that they are in. The this prevention of a potential pure monopoly in NVIDIA shows how governments maintain competition on a larger scale. And this is due or exemplified by NVIDIA's deals in 2019 and 2020, which really launched the program ahead of all the other competitors in its industry. So, in conclusion, my presentation showed how governments are able to regulate markets in order to maintain competition and the methods that they have to do so. It also exemplified the reasoning behind why these governments choose to go after oligopolies and pure monopoly type markets instead of pure competition and monopolistic competition markets. However, governments may not be right all the time about competition, shown in the Discover Capital One merger, how they felt that the merger would lead to less competition when in reality it would lead to more due to the firms and industries within the credit card market. Overall, government regulation and competition, it exists in oligopolies and pure monopolies due to the characteristics of their markets, and these examples are even seen in the real world today, shown within the Wall Street Journal article provided. These are just the Wall Street Journal articles that I use in order to get my point across.